Hi guys, I'm Chris,
And I'm Mike.
and welcome back to No Limits, a Mitch Rapp podcast. How you doing today, Mike? Or what are you drinking today, Mike?
Yeah, I was gonna say something new for the both of us, Cracked open a brew for this one. The third option kind of messes with your head, kind of some of the stuff that happens. So I think I needed a nice, refreshing raspberry sour ale. That's what I got going
Ooh,
on. How about you?
I'm just drinking a boring Miller Lite.
There you go.
It's a hot day. Got up for golf again this morning, so
You in this golf? What is this, round 26?
this is round 21.
All right.
Round 21.
Hey, well, I'm ready to talk third option with you and get into the
Yes.
themes of this book. But we have to pause to shout out another Twitter follower. We got a very encouraging message from Mieli at Amor Q Gloria, AMorQGloria. She's a listener from the Philippines. So
Nice.
yeah, we are definitely
We are
international.
multinational.
That is pretty cool. And it's all because of executive power. She's very excited for us to get to that book because the Philippines figure prominently in it, and a Filipino general plays a major role. And
Yep.
so, as we said before, we're going to take a break in August next month to get to Lethal Agent. We're excited to do something special for the rollout of Total Power in September. And then October, we'll get back on track in publication order with Separation of Power. And so we'll get to Executive Power in November. So that's our 2020 reading list right there for you. So thanks for listening, Mieli from the Philippines.
Right. And so what are we covering today? Today we're going to be going into our second part of the deep dive into Vince's book, The Third Option. And we will be talking about some of the themes that we gathered from the books, talk about maybe some of our favorite characters, have some questions for you, Mike. You have some questions for me, and then we'll finish with our zero sum game.
I'm curious how you rated this one. I haven't actually talked to you or seen what your final rating was. So I don't know. See if we're on the same page or not there. But before we get there, I have a quick hot take. I want to throw this at you. It popped into my mind, and I was like, "Hey, remind me to bring this up." Do you think that the third option would have worked better coming immediately after Term Limits, as if it were a kind of sequel to Term Limits, without having transfer of power in the middle? And that idea came to me because I was thinking how much I liked seeing Rapp and Coleman together at this baseball game, that scene.
Right.
And I really liked how Michael O'Rourke played a role again. I was kind of wondering, where is this awesome, badass congressman in Transfer of Power? Does he have anything to say about the events of Transfer of Power? We didn't see his perspective. And then Scott Coleman, he was our blonde haired assassin. Something resonated in Term Limits about him and Stansfield cutting a deal at the end, where Stansfield was going to let Coleman off the hook for the assassinations, but Coleman took care of Mike Nance for Stansfield, got him out of the way. And so I thought I wanted to see that relationship of Coleman running some ops for Stansfield. I would have wanted to see that continue after Term Limits, but Transfer Power almost gave us a complete 180. And thankfully, it introduced Rapp, right? But what do you think of this idea that third option could have worked right after Term Limits?
Yeah, no, when you broached this to me, I thought it was interesting to think about because I struggled to think. We asked ourselves this question, right, during our term limits episode, was like, what is Mitch Rapp doing during this time? And if you think of that, both of those happening at the same time, or roughly, I guess they're sequentially because there's a different president, right? But you have these players that are all in the same universe. I thought it would. I agree with you. I think that it would have done better coming before Transfer of Power. I think also I've mentioned this to you that because this book is very much like Mitch is a spy, like this badass spy. Not so much. He's also a badass operator, right? At the end, that's his action or whatever. But definitely in the beginning of the book, we see Mitch as a CIA spy. And that tone, especially if you're reading these like we are in publication order and not chronologically, it would be cool. It would have been cool to see like that progression of Mitch and then going into transfer power and building upon his skill, building upon his skills, knowing like how he's able to move around the White House and stuff like that in transfer power. So yeah, I agree with you that I think that the book could have worked better beforehand.
introducing Rapp during a White House takedown was freaking awesome. Like,
Yeah, no, don't get me wrong. I enjoy it, but just like for a thought experiment, yeah,
exactly. Yeah, same. Like it was so badass. And like the introduction of Aziz and knowing the history he has with Aziz, like nailed it. And I was just wondering if there was more of a connection between term limits and the third option than there is transfer of power and the third option. It seemed it would have flowed a lot better. But if you think about the opposite, a couple of problems would have come up, like Anna, right? Rapp has to meet
right,
Anna really through the White House
right,
story, and then also Stansfield being in poor health. A couple of things that would have been out of order.
yeah,
But you know what's cool is you mentioned we're wondering where Rapp was during term limits, and so it's awesome that Vince could bring him into the fold of this universe that he set up so well with term limits. Third option is where he finally does that. He brings the term limits universe and characters that we loved together with Rapp.
Let's first break down some of the themes that we sort of thought were prevalent in this book. And the first one that came to mind to me was, and it's pretty prevalent, I think, in most of these novels, but this idea of terrorism, both internationally and domestically, and that there needs to be something that needs to be done about it, right? That is the whole premise of why the Orion team was created, why these two sides of the party sort of developed this third option to combat this idea, the problem of that is terrorism. And so we see that play out, and it'll build more in the next book. But Count Hagemiller is the money guy for, we'll find out, Saddam Hussein, right? And so the government is very, we just had a terrorist attack on home soil at the White House, right? So this is very much a problem, not only in our universe but in Mitch's universe. And Mitch is driven by the Pan Am downing of Pan Am Lockerbie. So how well do you think Vince like plays upon this idea of like terrorism and how we tackle it?
Well, I think that's the key. The last point you mentioned of how we tackle it. I don't think this book is doing anything new by saying there are terrorists out there, right? But I think what he's doing here is shifting from reaction to being proactive, where transfer of power, we get hit. Aziz made his move, right? He made his move with the Pan Am flight years before, and he made his move taking the White House. It's masterful to introduce and play with the third option while you're also saying we are now going to be proactive in fighting terrorism in a covert way. The opening scene in Germany is cool for what it is and how it's written, but it's even more cool because we're taking the initiative, right? We are given the green light, and I think this is largely due to Thomas Stansfield and President Hayes' strong relationship and trust for one another, that Hayes authorizes, one, the Orion team to be created, which has been in the works already for a while, but he's authorizing missions like this one, not even being proactive in going after the terrorists, but being proactive in going after the funding sources, even if they're in our ally countries, very developed, very advanced, modern countries who are our allies. President Hayes is kind of putting a stop to that and saying the third option is in full swing, even against the royalty or nobility, the count in a friendly country. If you are linked financially to supporting and funding terrorism, I think Vince does a great job saying we're going to take the proactive stance and get the job done.
Right. The next thing that I just wanted to bring out is that this book really sort of focuses, at least for the first two-thirds of the book. Obviously we have like the action at the end with Anna and being kidnapped and all that stuff. This idea of CIA operations and the clandestine service, right? And so we know that Vince does very in-depth research, and I think this book is again another example of great research. And he shows his in-depth knowledge of how CIA stuff actually works, like the minute details in the Hagenmiller assassination, the minute details in how Mitch escapes from Germany into France. I really liked that was one of the highlights of this book that I really enjoyed. And then to add on that, I think that Vince sort of, at least when I think about this book, is it reminds me a lot of Ludlum's work, and specifically the Bourne series. And I feel like this is heavily influenced from that, especially the scene in France to Germany. It really reminded me of the Bourne Identity, and you even mentioned to me that you you thought that Irene Kennedy would have been a good, reminded you of a character in the Bourne movies, right?
Yeah, was it Pam who was
Pam
the?
Landy, yeah.
But anyway, she's a ranking official in the CIA leadership in the hierarchy, and I thought Pam Landy would have been a great Irene Kennedy. I really saw a parallel between those two roles, just the way they handled their assets in the field, the way they handled intelligence reports, and read the scene on the ground so well, even from an office. I guess it was Bourne Identity, if I'm not mistaken, where Jason Bourne knows that he's being hunted by people on the inside and is trying to expose them and get to the bottom of this, where he sets up with a sniper on the rooftop looking
Supremacy,
into her window. That
supremacy.
was Bourne Supremacy. He's
Yeah,
looking into the window and he has, his scope on her and he calls her up. Well, I feel like in this, Rapp sneaks up on Stansfield, right? He's
right.
he he corners Stansfield, Kennedy, and Coleman, gets the upper hand and puts them to the gun, if you will, to tell him the truth. That scene definitely made me think of what Rapp is doing here.
Yeah, no, I agree. And in the movies and in the books too, although the only one that's this somewhat similar is the first book, Identity to Identity. They don't take upon the second book. The movie becomes its own entity. But in the movies, we only know Jason what Jason Bourne knows, right? We know a little bit about like Blackbriar from like cutscenes, but we're finding it out as Jason's really finding it out, right? In the books, that's not that we know that Irene Kennedy didn't put a hit out on him, or at least like I guess I don't know. Did you ever at ever any point did you think she was lying, or that Harry and Stansfield were lying that they didn't kill Mitch?
As a reader, no. Like as a reader, it was pretty clear that Vince is bouncing between these different storylines, and so we pretty much know Stansfield and Kennedy are talking about this, saying, "Who did this? It wasn't us. We would have never done that." So it's pretty clear to the reader, but I really buy into the fact that Rapp wouldn't be so sure. Like I could see some people walking away from this book saying, "Why would Rapp not trust his boss Kennedy? They have a great relationship." Well, again, it's only the second time we've seen them in action, right?
True.
We did not have American Assassin. We don't know the origin story, if we're going in publication order. So I could see modern readers who know the whole Rapp saga and who may have started with the later books being like, "Oh, Rapp and Kennedy so tight, right?" Like
Right.
that's the team. It's like, older sister, mentor kind of thing, right?
Yeah, he even describes her as a sister sometimes. I feel like.
Yeah, exactly. But here it's totally believable. We haven't seen what they've been through together in detail, so it's totally plausible that Rapp is considering she put out a hit on him as a way to get rid of him. He knows the industry, right?
Right.
He knows that assassins are expendable, especially when they've run their course and when they start talking about getting out. Like it would not be beyond the realm of possibility that a hit is put out from the inside. So I believed him and what he was going through, but not as a reader. I didn't think for 1 minute that Stansfield and Kennedy were being fishy. Vince never really leads us on to that, right? Like
True. True.
he's very black and white or objective in good and bad, and that could be a fault maybe of his writing to some extent. But in this case, it's definitely not a fault. Like we want to know the good guys, and there's solace and comfort in reading these books, knowing Kennedy and Rapp are always going to be a team.
Right. Yeah. So, and then finally, I guess related to this, but it could be a different theme. Is you brought this up sort of yesterday or in our last podcast about you have the third option as what Mitch does, and then you also have the third option in how Mitch can get out, right? So we have this whole subplot of Mitch wants to get out. Mitch, because he met this girl, and he even mentioned it before he met Anna that he was done. He needed to get out of this business, but now he is more motivated to get out of this business. And so this is at the end of the story, he does get this third option to come into the fold, be part of the CIA in a known quantity, and
It's a little safer that way.
yeah, exactly. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, and that just came to me as I was reflecting on the book and thinking of that with Stansfield as a boss. There's so much power involved in his position, and he could look at an operative like Rapp who's run his course and is starting to crazy talk about getting out. He could look at him as expendable and on to the next. We put our resources into his program and the Orion program, lock it up, it's done, my time's over. But Stansfield is better than that. He finds that third option out of that moral dilemma as a way to let Rapp work for and in the CIA, not as clandestine or that high level top secret classification, and he gives him an option.
He'll struggle to actually fully get out, and we'll see that play out in the books. But
And in the end, there is no such thing as getting out, as we
right,
know and
exactly,
as we
we'll
see.
see that too. He's now people know he's Mitch Rapp and not Mitch Cruz when he goes to these meetings, right? Um, or I don't know, I forget if he actually uses his real name, but they know his face. And then later on, when we get introduced like the character of Mike Nash, he wants Mike Nash to be like the face of the agency, while he's able to take a back seat and be more secretive.
That's what, and a lot of people don't consider Nash as one of the main important characters, of the whole entire Rap saga. But I love when we get to that storyline because this whole Rap contemplating getting out, it's almost like knowing that he's guiding and advising Mike Nash, and Mike Nash can do it and can get out and can take the public accolades that he deserves and can be a public figure to show the good of what these services have done. It's kind of a closure for Rap, because he couldn't do that and he'll never be able to do that, but he's at least able to say, I mentored and got Mike Nash to be able to do it and live his life and be a family man that he always wanted to. So Rap kind of lives through Nash in that regard. So anyway, that's why he's an important character to me in the end that often gets forgotten, I think.
Yeah, no, I wish, because I feel like the first book that he's introduced, he's almost the main character in that book. We'll get to this obviously, but and then he sort of, because where how he transitions, he becomes sort of more of a side character. But I wish we got to see more of him because I really liked him. I think we both, when we filled out our fan profile, we both pick Mike Nash as our favorite. Not like without picking like Mitch Rapp or Iron Kennedy.
The big
You know,
three, the big two,
the
or the
big,
big three.
yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a little.
That's how I interpret that question. It'd be so hard to do like a Q&A where someone's like, what's your favorite book? What's your favorite character? Because my first reaction was Rap, Consent to Kill, American Assassin. But at the same time, I want to like find that edgy thing, like who's my favorite that's not the big shot or the big shots, and that's hard.
Scott Coleman,
Yeah,
because he's also, while my, like, I don't know, I don't want to call him minor, because mid major. Like we
yeah.
have mid
Secondary? No,
majors,
he's not even
secondary.
secondary. He's primary.
He's primary.
Yeah, that's a hard classification to make if you were to make primary, secondary, tertiary characters.
Yeah,
That secondary category would be,
like Marcus is definitely a secondary character because
yeah,
he comes in and out.
true.
I do like Marcus.
But hold on, if you think in terms of the importance to the mission, and especially in third option, he is primary on the importance to the
True,
mission.
true.
Rap,
See, that's why this is so hard.
it's
That's
so
why this is
hard
so hard.
in terms of
Yeah.
writing and literature. Yeah, he'd be a secondary character, but like Rap would never be able to hunt down the professor or make that phone call to Villam or any of these things without going to Marcus. And when he escaped Germany, Marcus was the first and only one he could trust.
True.
So it's like, man, we get these secondary characters that you just cherish. And
I guess you could put the primary characters as Mitch and Kennedy,
true, they're really the only two main primary characters.
and
Coleman at the top.
then you have the secondary characters that are Coleman, Stan Hurley, Thomas Stansfield, even though he's only in 4 or 5 books, but all the other characters that we see in multiple books across. And then, like, I would say tertiary characters are ones that are only in one, maybe in two.
Yeah, like in this, probably a Peter
Like Peter
Cameron,
Cameron,
the professor. Yeah, exactly.
the like,
Yep, exactly.
so.
Well, I mean, maybe that's a good thing to flesh out for a bonus episode when we're like halfway through all of these books. We take all the characters we met so far and kind of classify them or give our take on them.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Cool.
Right. So the third thing that I wanted to point out as a theme from this book is Vince really begins to show this idea of political warfare, and particularly, this is the first time that we see a political player as the main villain. We've mentioned this before, how he often chooses political players as like the secondary villains, the ones who are corrupt, whatever. But here we have one that is really driving he is the bad guy. He's the one behind he's the big bad, right? And also in the two previous books where we had vice presidents and we had chief of staffs who were doing these other stuff, they, I don't want to say they were idiots, but they weren't as masterful as I feel like Clark is. Clark is very intelligent, calculated. He knows what he's getting at. I feel like Nance and Stu Garrett wanted, like, their idea of themselves was what Clark is, but they didn't actually achieve that.
Yeah. So far, we've seen these politicians, I would say, they were certainly manipulative, like Stu Garrett, but they were manipulative in the sense of politician speak, right? Like, manipulate the media, or how do we change public opinion on this? They were maybe cruel in some ways, but Hank Clark here we see as being evil, right? We haven't seen a pure politician yet that represents so much calculating, malicious evil with evil intent. I mean, a lot of these secondary villains, the politicians so far, have wanted power, right? They all talk about moving up or getting recognized or gaining more authority. But it seems so far in this like soft political speak kind of way. Hank Clark, especially at the ending, which wasn't my favorite, as we're going to get to in a little bit, but at the ending when he's clinking his glass and he's just kind of toying and thinking Rapp might have won this battle or gotten the upper hand, you're kind of like, he's got some bad stuff planned. And as we know, he's going to be that primary villain motivating behind the scenes.
Yeah, at least the next book.
And so, Hank Clark is doing something new. And while I didn't like in this book every conversation he had, a lot of them were filled with some fluff and these complex machinations that I couldn't quite sift through as a reader that clearly. He still represents a really good character to bring in at this point of the journey. That really pure evil politician with power, with authority, and with a public persona that is secretly running the show.
Right. And I guess related to that, you sort of brought this up to me, this idea of throwaway or cleanup culture in the spy world or in the operator world. We don't really see that ever really happen with Mitch and like the CIA planning that, but it definitely probably happens. But we clearly see it here that they just have this, hire somebody to Cameron, kill the Jansons, or Cameron actually supposed to hire someone else to kill the Jansons, but he wants to do it himself. And then, boom, hire someone else, Doozer, to kill the people who killed the Jansons. And then, oh, well, I need to get rid of Cameron because he's a bumbling idiot and knows too much. So, boom, kill Cameron. That kind of stuff to me made them seem a little bit more as one, ruthless, but also more amateurish.
Yep.
To not pick people that you either don't trust or that you think will turn on you, like that to me is way more amateurism than what Mitch would do, right? He's going to pick somebody, if he needs to do something, he's either going to do it himself or he's going to pick people that he trusts.
Yep.
Whereas here, they're just, contract for hire.
Yep. Rapp wouldn't even waste his time on somebody that he think would make any number of these mistakes. He wouldn't waste his time, wouldn't give him the light of day. He'd move on. So it does expose that amateur handling of the professor, this Peter Cameron, and almost the amateur for being such a good villain, Hank Clark, how he's an amateur in terms of actually hiring and executing these operations. He might be good at the political backdoor kind of stuff, but it definitely exposes him as an amateur getting into the assassination game. So that what you just described bothered me about this book. You know how much I love these books and Vince Flynn, but I do want to do somewhat of a job critiquing them as well. I think where necessary on the podcast, not to come down hard on them, but who would really enjoy a review that's pure cheerleader, right? That just always makes these the best thing since sliced bread. I think he's the best writer in this genre. of the last 30 years, except for some of the classics, before him. But I still want to be able to critique what I think deserves criticism. And this is certainly it. Just that trope of getting rid of one assassin and move on to the next, and then hire the next, then hire the next. It just muddied the waters. It was a little too murky for me. And especially in the context of what Hank is doing already with Secretary of State Middleton and what he's doing with Congressman Rudin, you mix that in with all of this kind of stuff, and it just got too murky that I kept asking myself in the middle of the book, where's Rapp and when are we going to do something cool? So
Right. Yeah, you had a problem with like the middle of the book and
the pacing.
the pacing of that stuff. I didn't as much as you do, but now that you like have highlighted it, I tend to agree because I think we both agree that the beginning of this book up until Raph gets back to Stansfield House is amazing,
Fantastic.
and then like the action at the end of it is amazing, and so how can we get from A to Z, better in a sense, right?
Let me ask you something, and this was something you brought up earlier in one of our discussions. I'm thinking of the role of bodyguards, these security personnel who we know are nowhere near as trained as a Rapp or a Coleman for clandestine ops. They're just your average run of the mill, I don't want to say security guard, but a little higher up than that, right? Whether it's Secret Service uniform division, whether it's a bodyguard that's hired personally on a contract basis, whether it's an FBI agent. How do you think we should think about this role? Because often we see these people as very expendable. They're killed on the spot, or five are taken out going into a mission to get to the actual person you want. I understand in terms of like terrorist, right? Thinking the Farah Harut scene in Transfer Power, mow down as many of those guys as you want because they come out of their houses with AK-47s the moment they hear noise. Like, they obviously are protecting a terrorist. But what about here, like Count Hagenmiller, his bodyguards? Rapp doesn't want to kill them. He even takes one who's he incapacitated and drags him into another room so he won't die from the fire. At Stansfield House, obviously, since they're American and CIA personnel, he embarrasses this one guy who uh,
Right.
lets him onto the property with the scheme he had with the dog. So Rapp does want to protect these guys, not hurt them, but he makes a very serious lesson out of this one CIA guard watching Stansfield House. He makes him walk in with his pants tied around his ankles. He uses him as a human shield. He knocks him out and says, "You dummy. How could you let me in like this? Follow your protocol and your training." How are we supposed to think about that type of character?
It's interesting because I put this in my head or I've read it in one of these novels, and I feel like Vince or Mitch or Vince writing as Mitch uh, characterizes certain people differently, right? If it's a bodyguard, like you said, of a terrorist, of the big bad, someone who knew what they were getting into, then he has no problem. If he has to take out that person, he has no problem taking out the bodyguards too, because probably that bodyguard is trained to one, raise his weapon and be firing at Mitch if he's coming at his contract. Now, the difference is when you have bodyguards of just random people that, yeah, maybe they're a bad dude. Hagen Miller is the money guy, but his bodyguard he just knows that he's a banker, or he knows that he has a lot of money. He's some rich dude. And I think that's the difference that we get with Rapp, that he tries to actively, and obviously Americans who don't, innocent people, yeah, the guy did something bad. He shouldn't have let him in, or he wasn't adequately trained, or wasn't using his training properly. The difference between, like, let's say Peter Cameron and, or even like some other operator, Doozer, and Rapp, is that Doozer would have just killed. He would have walked in there to Hagen Miller's house and killed everybody. He would have shot the bodyguard and then came in. But Rapp's not that kind of guy. Unless he has like a personal vendetta against you, or he needs to take someone out, and that person is, like I said, like Aziz's body. If Aziz had bodyguards, or if, like, when we go to the Rap House, he's like, "I'm killing these motherfuckers. You can't stop me." Who cares what if they knew the whole thing, that like why we took Anna and stuff, like I'm killing every last one of them. That's his wiring in his brain is different.
I'm with you. And even in that case, the scene at Rapp's house and the takedown, I feel like he could have been more sympathetic to them like he was the other ones, except one, it was personal. They got Anna, and he already told Scott Coleman, I'm taking them all. But at the same time, they also impersonated FBI agents, right? And whether or not they were, they had government plates, so they might have had some sort of official designation. That automatically, right there in Rapp's mind, makes them complicit. Like you were saying, if you are somebody who is complicit and you know what you're defending, you're eligible.
Right.
You could be taken out. Well, in this case, just because they might have actually been government officials doesn't matter. They knowingly lied about it to capture Anna. They knowingly took her. Their fair game.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear your take on that. I always wondered that, what you thought about that, because we're talking a throwaway culture and how that's so amateur of Peter Cameron, the professor, and Hank Clark to just move on to the next assassin, shoot him. We don't need him anymore. Well, do we sometimes have the good guys doing that with these random people they shoot through to get to a target? But
True.
I think we see enough discrimination in terms of who is complicit, who isn't, and Rapp does go out of his way to protect those who he can if they are innocent. So,
Right.
you know,
All right. So next thing we want to talk about is who are some of you? I just want to ask you, who are some of your favorite characters in the book? Like major, minor, just off the bat, who are some of the people you really liked out of this book? Besides, again, our big three.
well, I can't really think to someone that I loved outside of the people we already knew and loved, but a few who fortified their position were Marcus Dumond. To me, I know you loved him straight off the bat, out of the gate. He really solidified his skills and position here. In Transfer of Power, I knew how good he was, and I watched him
Right.
on the comms and set up the comms and run those, but he didn't quite demonstrate that level of confidence, that level of skill. He could have just been any other hacker who's like, here, take this microphone, clip it on, But in this book, he's checking cell phone towers, he's digging through
We
CIA
see his
files.
expertise in action.
It's in action. Yep. We see him on the ground even. He's given live intel from the van, right?
Right.
He's keeping up with the mission in live time, relaying information to Rapp and helping him and Coleman put the pieces together to make on the ground decisions. We haven't seen that level of involvement from Marcus yet. And once again, I keep saying it, but just the fact that Rapp went to him, just the fact that he went to him first and sought him out, automatically, you're going to be my buddy, right?
Right. Right.
Even when you thought the CIA turned on you, Rapp trusted Dumond. I'd trust Dumond.
Right.
So how about you? Who were some characters that stood out to you?
I wish that we had gotten to see, because Stansfield is sort of going down, and I realize that there needs to be a transition to bring Irene more into the fold. And I think there are two books where we really see, two of the three books that we really see Stansfield in who he is. It was kind of sad that, you know, we know that his time is coming to an end. I liked our progression with Anna as a character. I feel like we learned a little bit more about her in this novel and how, her sort of inner workings, thinking about Mitch and her relationship with him and how that needs to potentially change. In the first novel, yes, we got, her backstory, whatever, and she was a person that needed to be saved. But here we get a little bit more, we begin to see her and Mitch's relationship sort of take a next step. I liked the villain in this one. I liked not like not I didn't like Peter Cameron. Peter Cameron was just like like I said yesterday. Peter Cameron was Zach Galifianakis with a gun. But
He did enough though, like for not really liking Peter Cameron as a character or liking who he was. I still think it was a good call by Vince to make a character who's eager to get into the action.
true,
Kennedy is so staunch on I run the ops, I'm the intelligence, and Mitch and Coleman are so much we're the assets on the ground. We're not going to interrupt their work. And Kennedy's like, and Kennedy and Stansfield are, I'm not going to interrupt their calls on the ground. If they make the call, it's the right call. That black and white of like the office work versus the field work. Well, I think Vince did a smart play with the professor wanting to try to merge those. He wanted to be the academic. He was a professor of intelligence and he had experience doing that. He was so eager to get into the field. And I think making that a big flaw of his I think is realistic. I think that was good to show there are people who, because of their pride, their hubris, or just their excitement, it overtakes them. Like, he thought he could follow Rapp in the forest in Germany. What an
Right.
idiot. So
Yeah,
from the
no.
get-go, I'm thinking this is going to be a really trained person if they snuck up on Rapp in the forest. I mean, Rapp heard them, but and then we learn it was him, and he's just some dude. He's actually, Vince describes him as an overweight professor who wants to get into the game. I'm like, come on, bro. Come on. This is not going to end well for you. And ice pick to the ear doesn't end well for him.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Yeah, but I liked Hank Clark, and I thought, we'll talk about it more in the next book, but I liked bringing him in as, again, sort of bringing that secondary villain to the forefront of the politicians and making him this intelligent guy who is going to be pulling the strings. He's going to go across the party lines to manipulate two Democrats to essentially get him to do what he wants him to do, which is become president, right? He wants to take down the CIA, make Hayes look bad, and then be able to walk into the office, right? So I like that, bringing in this fresh type of villain as opposed to the having Aziz. I like Aziz as he's a better villain, obviously, but I like the new type of villain we got here.
One other character before we move on, I don't want to say too much because she plays a big role. Donatella. I think we
Yeah,
get a pretty compelling introduction to who she is without giving too much. It's one of those like very subtle cliffhangers. The ending of this book is a very direct on the nose cliffhanger that maybe I could have done without, but Donatella's introduction is a very subtle cliffhanger that makes you want more. Like when we learn she had this background as a druggie and she was getting into some bad stuff and she was running out of options and relapsing, Mossad was there, and Mossad was almost like this a father figure, this mentor that saved her, the savior figure, really, where Donatella could have gone down a really bad path, and she already was, but Mossad was willing to be patient and saw something in her. Now, are they manipulating her? Are they taking a young, vulnerable person and, kind of putting a gun in their hand and shipping them off? They kind of are. They're taking advantage of her, but at the same time, they're giving her a new life. They also have the patience as she relapses. They're with her every step of the way, saying, "We'll pull you out of this. We'll train you, and we'll financially support you. We'll mentally support you, and we'll get you back on your feet." And so Mossad was kind of in it for the long game, prepping and training Donatella to become this super agent. And so I do want to know more. Also, she's a vixen, right? Like we see her in Milan wearing these heels. She's in the fashion industry. She's a model. And so we really want to know more about this supermodel turned super agent. But I could also agree with people who see that as a cheap stereotype, kind of like we're going to introduce a female character. She's going to be a really cool badass agent, but guess what? We have to make her a pretty model wearing heels. So I could see that critique as well of Donatella. So what do you think? Were we set up to really want to know more about Donatella here?
yeah, I think so, and we'll in time we'll learn more about her backstory. But yeah, it was a nice like sort of slow introduction to Donatella in the whole overarching story.
Yeah.
All right, so Mike, I had one question about not only this book but all of Flynn book in general. Do you think that Vince Lynn's style of including background for almost all of his characters does it take away from the story's tension?
As in, are we getting too much? Like, we want to
Yeah,
hit that Goldilocks zone of giving you enough to buy into the character, but not so much that it becomes as technical as like as technical as Tom Clancy is with military ships, or as Jack Carr is with savagery. We want to hit that Goldilocks zone of just enough detail. Is that kind of what you're asking?
right. Like you're reading a story, and then boom, the next chapter will start off with a character, and he goes into, I don't know, 4 to 5 page background, and then it does slow the pace a little bit. We have exalted that in the past, and I believe like that's one of the reasons why you have a problem with the middle of this book is because we get a lot of that, right? We get a lot of these smaller characters, so that's why I just asked this question: is what do you think? Like maybe is it a book by book case where yes, we like it, but sometimes it can be too much?
Yeah. You know what? I think that's it. What I thought bogged down the pacing was too many of these, not even secondary, but tertiary characters being thrown at us. And I think for this particular book, yeah, that was a little overwhelming. And a few of them we got detail on that we didn't really need. As a whole, I'm totally fine. And it's masterful how Vince does do it. For example, term limits. When we first met Senator Fitzgerald,
Right.
I was so excited to get like a 3-page description of him as this fat cat,
And then he
corrupt
died.
politician. And then he dies right away. And I thought it was amazing and it got me. So I'm okay with one, how Vince does it. And I'm okay with how often he gives us background on a character. I think my issue here was, like you said, more book specific, that it got bogged down by the number of tertiary hired help assassins coming in, coming out, getting mentioned, moving on. And it's only because it was also happening at the same time as we were getting that with congressmen. So we were getting a little muddied in Secretary of State Middleton, Congressman Rudin, and this other person they meet with at the Capitol. And so I think between that plus this throwaway culture of the assassins, that was too many characters at once. Not
Yeah.
necessarily too much detail about those characters. I appreciate that.
So I do find it interesting though that we don't really get that for Peter Cameron. Well, we get a brief description of like who, what his, he calls him overweight, right? And we know that he works at GW. And I mean, I guess intentionally, we don't want to know too much about him because he's the professor. He's like, over time, we realize he's not the one actually pulling the strings. But we don't get a whole backstory. We don't. We know that he used to be in the CIA. We don't know about that time in the CIA or any sort of other stuff. Do you think that's interesting that he chose not to give us like as detailed of a background for him?
It might make sense in this case because he is that singular character. So you might want that one detail of him being overweight, or that one detail of him thinking he could be both be in the CIA and know stuff and then also be a professor. Like, I think he is so singular in that it's okay and it works for him. He would be another character I would critique if we got a ton of expose on his background, just because I didn't need it. I didn't want it. He was set up to play the role he was set up to play, and I was okay with that. So, question for you while we're on the level of detail. How do you feel about how much detail and description is given to the settings of a lot of the scenes in the book? Whether it's the forest in Germany or even Rapp's house when they're going over the layout of the property and how they're going to carry out the mission depending on where the tangos are inside the house. How do you feel Vince balances giving us too much detail on a setting versus not enough where we don't have the full imaginary picture in our mind?
I think for the most part, he does a pretty good job of it, and I think that what he does leads it to be a better story. I do know that I have read some stories in this genre where the technical detail, especially when they're talking about weapons or some type of ship or boat or aircraft, and I'm sure like there's military people out there who are reading these and they're like friggin' love that shit. Because I don't know it as much,
Yep.
it bogs me down a little bit. I don't think Vince does that as much as other people do, and for me personally, I appreciate it. Although I'm intrigued about learning about some of these stuff, so I don't want it at all. But I think he does a good job of sort of having a balance, and I enjoy like the descriptions of a scene of the forest in Germany or of his house or of Stan Tooth's house, describing like some sort of mahogany, or the leather, whatever, that allows you to think about the picture much better.
Yep. I think you use the right term, balance, because I too appreciate that in moderation. And it's like the helicopter scenes that we've gotten. Vince doesn't go crazy telling us about the manufacture of how many cylinders or valves there are in the engine or whatever, how many liters the fuel tank is.
Right.
Like, it's just enough, but he does
But he
teach us
tells
about
you how
the
many we
type.
have
Yep.
and where they're going to come from
Yep.
and how many pilots and that the pilots are damn good. And I like that kind of
Yep.
stuff
And the
because
model, he tells us the
yeah,
model, if there are any moderations made to it.
and I can follow along with that stuff.
Yep.
But I can't follow along with, oh, this gun has this thing and
And these
does
6
this.
attachments
Yeah.
that
I,
serve this purpose.
yeah.
I guess some people though are like that, and I mean, the master was, like you said, Tom Clancy. So it's like I think Vince Flinner's is modernizing and simplifying in a sense, and I think that draws in a more modern reader.
But I have read stories where we go in the complete opposite, where we have none of that. And it leads to
That's
a
true.
pretty boring story and tough reads, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, I certainly agree. Um, I'm going to grab another raspberry sour ale, and then let's get to our winners and losers.
That sounds good. All right, so let's finish this up with our winners and losers, or how we like to call it here on Mitch Rapp Pod, the zero sum game.
So, Chris, what did you think was the best in terms of action?
In terms of action, either Hagenmiller's death scene or Mitch taking the house at the end, or even like Donatello Ron killing Peter Cameron. That was kind of an intense scene. Like Mitch running down the corridor. She's because you think like, oh, is he going to get to her before she does? Those three scenes to me were what I thought the best. But what I liked more about this book was not the action. It was more like seeing Mitch as a spy, and as we mentioned before, very different than the first novel in that sense. And I also, on to piggyback that, I like the descriptions of the spycraft and how spies actually go about running if there's a burn notice for them. So that's what I really thought was best about this book. What about you, Mike?
Yeah, I'll agree. That was intriguing. Almost the philosophical aspect of the third option, and when it plays out in real time, whose lives are at stake and caught in the crossfire. I thought that was a really intriguing setting to put the story into. You're right. The few action scenes we got were great. Don't forget, not just the house scene at Rapp's own house, but the Stansfield house scene. That might have been my
Right, right.
absolute favorite because it combined that spycraft perfectly. When Rapp picks up this dog, I'm like, what the hell does Rapp want a dog for? Is Anna really bugging him that hard about settling down? But then he goes jogging on this trail and ends up behind Stansfield's house. I'm like, oh boy. So him going into his boss's house, I thought was pretty awesome. Now I know you're not going to have as much to say for this, but what didn't you like? What do you think did not work out?
So I think I'd have to agree with you with, and while this is very traditional to a Vince Flynn novel with the jumping back and forth between both Mitch and our people, the CIA, and then oftentimes the villain. I think for this, because there were so many characters, there was multiple different assassins going at one time. There was, Mitch wasn't with Irene or Stansfield, so like they were separated. Going back and forth a lot to me slowed down the middle of this book, and that was the problem for me. And this actually brought me to thinking about something that I wanted to broach to you on this pod. And so Vince uses the choice of an omniscient third person, right? So that we have an omniscient point of view. So does the reader know too much about each character? That's the first question. And then what if this novel was told from the first person and not the third? Like, what if we only saw, and I mean, I guess it doesn't have to be the first person, but like, what if we only saw what Mitch knew? We didn't have these cutbacks. Like, how would you feel about this book? Would you feel about it differently than how you? I saw your rating. I know what you did. You don't know what I wrote it, but like, would you feel about this book differently?
That's a good question. So, do you know if there any of these books where Mitch is really in the first person, where he's narrating his own thoughts and whatnot? Like,
I don't think so. I don't think so. What caused me to think about this? I've read a few. There's like 30 of them, but I've read like 9 or 10 of the Jack Reacher series, Lee Child's Jack Reacher series, and he's actually played around. I don't know if it continues, but at least within the first like 7 or 10 books, one will be first person
mm.
and one will be third person, and then like two will be third person, and then we'll go back to first person. And so at first that was kind of jarring to me, like going back and forth, but it was kind of cool because it really dictated how you felt about the story. You
So,
could
yeah.
never be with you can only be with the villains if your main character was there. And also, like I'm going to mention this here, like in Harry Potter, yes, it's not first person, but we're only ever see I'm almost positive we only ever see scenes with Harry, and when we don't see scenes with him, it's because he's having a dream or it's because he's having a vision, because of his connection with Voldemort or whatever. So in the novels, this is not how they do it in the movies.
So you're saying what if we had a rap book where we don't know what the other characters are thinking or scheming? We only see it from Rap's point of view.
Yeah, exactly. Either that, or it would be completely first person, like we are in Rapp's head. Well, I guess we kind of are in Rapp's head sometimes, but like,
I think we're in Rapp's head because that omniscient narrator is so
right,
detailed and so thorough that we almost feel as if it's first person. So I feel like with Rapp, it's really well done. I don't know. That's a tough question. I would be hesitant though, because one of the gems of most of these books is, like, I loved in Transfer Power, Rafiq Aziz and hearing from him on the inside. I feel like that was first person, the way I could hear Aziz's voice like speaking to me as he's like scheming and figuring out where his people are and how he's going to execute the mission. So I feel like that's a strength. I just think in this book I had too much of Hank Clark doing that in complicated ways, while I had too much of Peter Cameron doing that in complicated ways. So sticking to Mitch's viewpoint on this book might have been a good move for me. Because
right,
I would have felt that tension of, and you said one of the winners was Mitch on the run.
yeah.
When you feel like the third option is being turned on its head and going after you. I love that idea of, holy shit, what's he going to do as the world's most trained operative. So that first person might have really worked for me in this book.
And it could have, like, we could have really thought that, oh shit, Irene Kennedy is trying to kill him, you
She
know?
might want to hit on him. Yeah, well,
Yeah,
then it's a little too much Bourne sounding, but
true.
yeah,
But, you know,
it would have been intriguing, especially because at this point we wouldn't have known Kennedy and as well and had that rapport. Um, so I think that could have worked at this point in the story. It would have, I guess, it would have been a risk. It's also not Vince's
it's
style.
not his style, but it was just something that I thought I was thinking about when we were sort of talking about what we didn't like about the book, and then it led me to down this path of, well, what if the book was sort of told a little bit differently? So,
That's true. It's another one of those thought experiments that that's actually making me think. That's a good question.
yeah. Is there anything else you didn't like about it?
Yeah, I have to get this off my chest. The endings, and I don't want this to become a theme long term, but yet another book here where I'm kind of petering out at the end. In here, we had at least the last 15 pages, maybe more, this convoluted dialogue. It was like we had so many moving pieces. We needed to put the president in the Oval Office with Stansfield just telling you the story. We needed to bring in Secretary of State Middleton just to close his story. Let's bring in the next guy and close his story. And it ended up being fill in the gaps, wrap up the story, have some dialogue to tell us how it closed. No, I'll say this: there were some gems in there though,
Yeah.
especially when it turned to Stansfield expressing to Rapp in front of the president how honored he was to work with him and how he's the best of the best. But otherwise, most of the dialogue, particularly in the Oval Office at the end, wasn't doing it for me.
Yeah, I could see that.
How about you? Was there anything that maybe didn't gel with you
No,
that we didn't
I
cover?
just no, I don't think so.
All right, I'm curious now to hear your final take on the book.
Okay.
What's your final rating of this book if you were going to give it a letter score and maybe a number out of 10?
Right. So I gave it a B plus, and I gave it a because I also gave term limits a B plus, but I'm getting ranking it higher than term limits, so I'm giving it a 7.7. Not quite an 8. I didn't obviously didn't dislike it as much as you do, but I obviously didn't love it as much as Transfer Power. It's not in my top 5, for sure. Probably somewhere middle of the pack. Um, Although it may be closer to the bottom if we some of the middle ones are better. We'll have to definitely do a podcast on that in the future. But yeah, what did you end up?
First off, I'm floored you put it higher than term limits. I mean, if anything, this book made me want to rate term limits even higher.
Wow.
Yeah, I want to go back and put whatever it was. I think maybe a B or B plus on term limits. I want to jump that up to an A minus for sure. Knowing what I know now about Coleman and the O'Rourke's.
We're gonna have to have a sliding scale. I feel like because we're as we're reading these, things are we're gonna have to change our ratings. I think
Especially for me. I know you reread these more recently than me, but I actually read all of these books.
as they came out.
Yeah, so some of them over 10 years ago. And I know you read them recently within the last couple of years. I reread them here and there, but it was spotty. Like maybe 3 years ago, I reread, American Assassin because I liked it or whatever. So I'm definitely going to need a moving scale. Oh, okay, but I gave it a C plus, a 5.5 out of
Ooh,
10.
harsh, harsh.
I actually I don't even know if I'd round that up to a 6. There were a lot of scenes that were A plus, lights out. We talked about them quite a bit, right? There were some developments for characters that I loved, and I'm all in on. If I'm looking at the book and the experience of reading it through, it was too much of a roller coaster for me, and large parts of that roller coaster were just like, where am I right now? What are we doing? It didn't cut it for me. So yeah, middle of the pack, slipping towards the bottom, maybe bottom 5 of all of Vince's work. That's going to be, I know that's going to come off as harsh to a lot of people.
Well, I mean, probably because most of it is still, while it's in the bottom five, it's still decent. It's not like atrocious. So
Yeah, and even better than decent, right? Like I've read a lot of paperbacks that I picked up that were complete trash and garbage. So like
right,
me giving this
right,
a C plus is still like, it's a C plus that's in the top 10% of my favorite books and best books ever written in my
right,
regard.
right,
So C plus in terms of what I know Vince is going to do for us in the future and what he already did for us
right.
in Transfer of
So
Power.
are these your prequel version, like Star Wars prequel version, like to the for Vince?
You know what this it's like the opposite of when you see a Star Wars movie, you leave the theater, that was the best one ever, that was amazing. And then 2 days later you're like, oh, that was kind of crap. It's the opposite for me, right? It's like, I know how good these are, but when I finish it, I kind of want to critique it and pull it apart. So it's like the
Right,
opposite.
right.
Now the covers. I found a lot of versions. I've never seen half of these, I'll be honest with you, when I was looking these up. So we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and I. So we have 9 versions that I found, at least online
And you're
randomly.
gonna post these on Twitter so our fan can see them and vote on it, right?
Yeah, a lot of our fans already should have seen these and chimed in and told us what their favorites were. If you haven't, reply, let us know. We have a graphic with all 9 of these covers. So, Chris, what's your favorite?
I had to pick I might be biased because this is the version that was on my Kindle. I also like, sorry, I should describe these. I is this lion, which you're telling me is from the Ulysses S. Grant
Yeah, just
Memorial,
west of the Capitol. It's often forgotten, but the Ulysses S. Grant Memorial has these 4 lions. Yeah.
and it's these lions that are looking at the Capitol building, and I like that. You have G is the paperback that I own, non-Kindle version paperback that I own. Again, it's this trope that we see with a lot of these covers where you have a guy in a jacket walking down. He's not doesn't look armed in this one, but where do you think he's walking, Mike?
I wanted to say Union Station again,
Yeah,
but
it's just never in Union Station though. So
yeah,
again, a lot of times they pick these places that never have anything to do with it.
that was throwing me off on a couple that I actually liked. So like C, I think is pretty cool. C completely changes the color scheme. It's these light purples, almost this pastel, and it's a sunrise or maybe even a sunset. And there's a pier, a wooden pier going out into who knows what body of water because there's no body of water in this book. But there's an operative standing there with the hands behind his back, peering out into this sunrise sunset with all these purple hues.
These things are cool, but they pick areas like the last one. He's running through like a field with an electrical thing. Like they pick places that aren't in the actual book. It
Yeah,
drives me nuts.
I thought A was pretty awesome. And A,
Yeah, I like A. I like A.
I didn't recognize
What
this
is A?
monument at first. Yeah, so my first thought was what we see is a round colonnade, and coming out of this round colonnade is a straight, tall column with a winged statue on top, a winged figure. And so at first, I was like, I don't know where that is. I was actually waiting to see this monument and the statue. And while it didn't figure prominently, it is in Berlin. Um,
Oh, okay. Gotcha, gotcha.
yeah, it's a pretty big monument in Berlin, something to do with one of the Prussian wars. I think of
Okay.
the 18th century. But so the monument made sense for Berlin because the book does start there, but they
Right.
never go to this monument. So I do like the contrast though. We got these light blue. It's a very like teal blue sky with a silhouetted foreground with the statue in the middle of it. So that one was cool, but not my favorite.
We have two retro ones that have just, looking on the reflecting pool onto the Washington Monument. Pretty classic. I think you could literally put this on any of the books and put the title on there. So those weren't my favorite. D really threw me for a loop. Why does it have a biohazard
Dude,
thing on
I
there?
don't know, man. I saw that and I was like, I'm striking D. The color composition is kind of cool. These faded reds and what and this bright white,
It's a
but
fine cover without
it's got the biohazard
the
symbol
the.
dead center. I don't know.
That'd be
Okay,
better for Lethal Agent.
all right. You got to give me E, and I'm also biased because that's my copy, my paperback, but it's
Boom.
also my favorite. I mean, it's that
I
retro
like the spider
feel.
web.
Exactly. It's a straight red, and it's got this spider web, and at the center of it is the presidential seal. And it's not just like a 2D image of the presidential seal, it's a 3D, like bas relief, ceramic almost. And it's right in the middle of this spider web. And that describes the third option for me. Like people get caught in the spider web of the third option, even when they're our own people, knowing Rapp was trying to run from them. So,
And we also have like the spider web of lies, like between like
exactly.
who's running stuff in the background, like with Hank and the politicians.
Now, I included this one just because it popped up. It's the German version, and man, is this thing sweet! That definitely would have been my favorite if I knew any word in German. But we got a pretty cool looking operative with a pistol in the air, the Capitol behind him. He's got this like he's got this face. I don't think he looks like Rap to me. I don't think he would be a good Rap. This guy,
He's a European rep.
he would definitely be the European Rap, like wearing a leather jacket, looking all suave. He's like the Fabio Rap. Yeah, like if Rap had a long lost German cousin who's a fashion model, this would definitely be that version of Rap. It's still kind of a badass cover. I
Yeah,
don't know.
no, that is good cover. Yeah,
Ein Mitch Rapp thriller.
yeah. So we're interested to hear from you guys what you liked about this. We'll talk about it, bring it up briefly in our next pod.
Please don't burn me too much for giving a Vince Flynn book a C plus. Remember, it is relative, right? A C plus relative to the great works that we know are coming.
Right, so that is the third option. So we're now 3 books down, and a lot to go.
Yeah. What are we going to be covering next on the podcast?
Right. So in our next podcast, we're going to be releasing a bonus episode centered on a topic from the third option. And in this one, we're going to be doing another movie watch and discussion. So from this, we sort of were thinking about what we could do. And one of the prevalent things in this is the third option, the CIA, the extra actions that our nation takes as for counterterrorism. And so we were looking for movies that covered the CIA, and we found this documentary on Showtime. Got an 8 on IMDb, and it's called "The Spy Masters: CIA in the Crosshairs," and it's a bunch of collection of interviews from I think like 7 or 8 past CIA directors. So hopefully you guys watch that and you can hear our commentary on that, and be look out for that mid-month. So
I'm excited you found this documentary because we're no experts on the clandestine service or even the military. And this documentary seems to give us, in their own words, the former directors of the CIA, and combine that with the Stansfield storyline of him passing the reins and passing the torch to Irene Kennedy. I mean, I think it's going to be awesome to discuss this and hear, in their own words, what a lot of DCIs of the past had to say.
right. And also, we're going to be releasing a brief but exciting announcement about how you could potentially help us support this podcast and get exclusive content. So please be on the lookout and listen to that. Please subscribe, rate, and review us using your favorite podcasting platform. You can find us online at mitchrappod.com or using our Twitter handle at mitchrappod. And as always, just let Mitch be Mitch. Guys, we're just simply 2 fans offering a discussion and reviews of some of our favorite books and characters. This podcast is not officially affiliated with Vince Flynn, Kyle Mills, or Simon & Schuster. But thank you to them for bringing us this wonderful world of Mitch Rapp.